My son restricted me from his wedding. He didn't know I owned the $40 million hotel chain he booked. Tomorrow's meeting would change everything. But tonight, I found something in those papers that made my blood run cold, a board resolution dated 6 months ago, discussing succession planning and widow transition strategies. What would you do if your own child tried to write you out of their happiest moment? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The envelope wasn't on my kitchen table. 27 years of birthday cards, holiday photos, and hand-delivered announcements, but my son's wedding invitation never arrived. Have you ever been deliberately excluded from the most important day in your child's life? Have you watched someone you raised turn their back on you for reasons you couldn't understand? Do you know the sharp pain of being erased from your own family story? This is about more than a missing invitation. This is about a mother who discovered her son was getting married at a venue she secretly owned, while being told she wasn't welcome to attend. What would you do if your own child tried to write you out of their happiest moment? Stay with me. You're about to discover how far one woman went to reclaim not just her place at the table, but the entire restaurant. The morning started like any other Tuesday in my Denver kitchen. Coffee brewing, newspaper folded, silence that felt normal after 20 years of living alone. Then came the phone call that shattered everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my only son. Margaret, honey, are you okay? My neighbor Carol's voice carried that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. I saw the announcement in the society pages. The wedding looks beautiful. Wedding? I set down my coffee cup with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. What wedding, Carol? The pause stretched too long. Michael's wedding. Next month at Golden Peak Resort in Aspen. The photos are gorgeous, mountain views, glass ballrooms, very elegant. My son Michael. Getting married. At Golden Peak Resort. I hung up without saying goodbye and grabbed the newspaper with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. There it was, page 12 of the lifestyle section, Michael Thompson to wed Amanda Richardson at exclusive mountain resort. 3 paragraphs about the couple, the venue, the guest list of close family and friends. My name appeared nowhere. Golden Peak Resort. I stared at those words until they blurred. The irony cut so deep I almost laughed. My son had chosen to exclude me from his wedding at a venue I'd quietly owned for 15 years. Most people knew James Thompson as the face of Rocky Mountain Hospitality Group. Smooth talker, brilliant marketer, the man who'd built a luxury resort empire across 3 states. What they didn't know was that every deed, every contract, every major decision flowed through documents bearing my signature. When my husband died in that car accident 20 years ago, James had stepped in as interim manager. Just until you're ready, he'd said. No need to burden yourself with the business side during your grief. Interim became permanent in everyone's mind except mine. I kept the legal control but let him have the spotlight. It seemed easier. Kinder. Less confrontational. Now my son, my own flesh and blood, was spending his wedding money at my resort while treating me like a stranger. I walked to my bedroom and knelt beside the safe my husband had installed behind our wedding photo. The combination hadn't changed in 20 years, Michael's birthday. The metal door swung open to reveal stacks of documents I hadn't touched in months. Property deeds. Stock certificates. Board meeting minutes. Voting proxies. All signed, all legal, all mine. Golden Peak Resort was just one piece. The empire stretched from Colorado to Texas to Florida, 47 properties, $40 million in assets, thousands of employees. On paper, Margaret Thompson owned it all. In reality, everyone from my son to the business press treated me like a grateful widow living on a pension. The wedding contract would be processed through our main accounting office. Standard procedure for family bookings. I had 48 hours before the final payment cleared. If someone tried to edit you out of your own life on paper, would you speak up now, or wait and watch? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in months. David Martinez, the attorney who'd helped draft my husband's will and had never stopped treating me like the business owner I legally remained. David? It's Margaret Thompson. I need to see you tomorrow morning. Bring the corporate bylaws, all of them. Comment: silence equals surrender, if you'd have stayed quiet but started taking notes. As I hung up, one question echoed through the empty house. How long had my son been told I didn't matter? And more importantly, who had been doing the telling? The safe stayed open. For the first time in years, I had work to do. Tomorrow's meeting would change everything. But tonight, I found something in those papers that made my blood run cold, a board resolution dated 6 months ago, discussing succession planning and widow transition strategies. Ever gotten paperwork that proved someone was planning your erasure? Tell us in the comments. David Martinez's law office smelled like leather and old coffee. The same smell from 20 years ago when my husband and I had signed our first property deed together. Now I sat across from David's mahogany desk, watching him flip through documents that told a story I'd been too trusting to see. Margaret, these board minutes are fascinating. His voice carried that controlled tone lawyers use when they're trying not to explode. Particularly this section about gradual leadership transition and protecting the founder's legacy. He slid a photocopy across the desk. The header read, Rocky Mountain Hospitality Group, Executive Session Minutes. My name appeared 3 times, each reference colder than the last. Line 42, David pointed with his pen. Quote, Mrs. Thompson's emotional state following recent family developments may require careful management of her business involvement. Emotional state? I'd been grieving my husband, not losing my mind. Line 67, board consensus suggests phased reduction of widow's operational input to preserve company stability. Phased reduction. Widow's input. As if 20 years of marriage and business partnership could be filed away like outdated inventory. And here's my favorite, David's sarcasm cut sharp. Line 91, J. Thompson recommends assuming primary communications role to reduce confusion among staff and vendors. James Thompson. My husband's business partner. The man I'd trusted to handle the complicated stuff while I grieved. The man who'd been intercepting my calls, redirecting my mail, and apparently convincing my own son that I was too fragile for business decisions. David, show me everything. For the next hour, we spread papers across his conference table like pieces of a puzzle I should have solved years ago. Property deeds with my signature. Stock certificates in my name. Voting agreements that gave me control of every major decision. On paper, I owned a hospitality empire worth $40 million. In practice, I'd been treated like a pensioner grateful for monthly allowances. The wedding contract, I said, pulling out the Golden Peak booking confirmation Carol had helped me obtain from a friend in catering. Can we stop the payment? David studied the contract with the focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. His eyebrows raised slowly. They plan to erase her completely. Subscribe before they succeed with someone you know. Margaret, this contract was signed without proper board authorization. As majority shareholder, any expenditure over $50,000 requires your written approval. He looked up with something close to a smile. They've been operating illegally for months. The room went quiet except for the hum of his office heater. 20 years of being sidelined, and they'd handed me the perfect legal weapon. What's our next move? We freeze the account. Tonight. Before they realize you're paying attention. I thought about my son, probably showing Amanda the resort brochures, excited about their perfect mountain wedding. I thought about James, smugly approving expenses at properties he didn't own. I thought about every conversation where I'd been told to let the professionals handle it. Screenshot those meeting minutes in your mind, they become weapons later. Chapter 2 Cliffhanger. At 11:47 p.m., I signed the payment freeze order. By morning, Golden Peak Resort's accounting department would be scrambling to explain a bounced payment to a very confused groom. But first, I needed to call someone who'd been on the inside all along, someone who'd watched this happen and stayed silent until now. Rebecca Martinez had worked for Rocky Mountain Hospitality for 12 years. She'd started as a receptionist and worked her way up to executive assistant, my executive assistant, though she'd been reassigned to James's office 3 years ago, for efficiency purposes. When my phone rang at 6:23 a.m., her voice sounded different. Careful. Like someone checking for listeners. Mrs. Thompson? I heard about the payment freeze. We need to talk. An hour later, we sat in a corner booth at Sam's Diner on Colfax, far from downtown offices and corporate ears. Rebecca clutched her coffee cup with both hands and spoke in whispers. I should have called you years ago. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. After Mr. Thompson died, James started changing things. Small stuff at first. Redirecting your mail to his office for review. Scheduling meetings when you weren't available, then claiming you'd declined to attend. My stomach tightened. What else? Phone calls. Vendors, contractors, even family members. When they asked for you directly, James would take the message and say you'd call back. But you never got the messages. 20 years of wondering why people seemed distant. Why invitations stopped coming. Why my son rarely shared details about his life. He told everyone you were overwhelmed. Grieving. That business stress was too much for you. Rebecca's voice cracked. He made it sound like kindness. And Michael? Your son calls the office sometimes. James always takes those calls personally. I've heard him say things like, your mother's having a difficult time and we're handling everything so she doesn't have to worry. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. My son thought I was fragile. Incompetent. A burden to be managed rather than a mother to be consulted. Rebecca, I need you to tell me everything. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. I've been keeping copies. Insurance, I guess. Or maybe I hoped someone would eventually ask the right questions. The folder contained emails, memos, and meeting schedules that painted a clear picture of systematic isolation. Phone logs showing calls marked redirected, do not forward. Vendor contracts with payment authorizations forged in my name. Board meeting invitations sent to an old address I hadn't used in 15 years. When insiders risk everything to warn you, listen. Ever had someone do this for you? The wedding contract, Rebecca said quietly. James approved it personally. Used emergency authorization powers. What emergency authorization? That's the problem. Those powers expired 3 months ago. The board never renewed them. She pulled out another document. This contract is legally worthless. I stared at the signature page. James Thompson, acting chairman. A title that had quietly become permanent in everyone's mind except the legal documents that mattered. Rebecca, why are you telling me this now? She finally looked up. Because I heard him on the phone yesterday with someone from the wedding planning company. He said, and I quote, "Don't worry about the old woman. She doesn't even know what she owns anymore." The old woman. 20 years of faithful service to a company I'd helped build, and I'd become the old woman in conversations about my own business. Chapter 3 Cliffhanger. As Rebecca slid the folder across the table, she whispered, "There's something else. The payment freeze you signed last night? James doesn't know it exists yet. But when he finds out, he's going to panic. And people who panic make mistakes. How many more mistakes had they already made? I was about to find out." David Martinez spread the Rebecca's documents across his conference table like a detective organizing evidence. His expression grew darker with each page he examined. "Margaret, this isn't just poor communication. This is systematic fraud." He picked up the wedding contract and pointed to the signature line. James used emergency powers that expired 94 days ago. That makes this contract legally void. Void how? Any expenditure over $50,000 requires either full board approval or your direct signature as majority shareholder. James had neither. David's pen tapped against the paper. He committed the company to a $250,000 event using authority he didn't possess. $250,000. My son's wedding had become a corporate crime scene. But there's more. David opened his laptop and pulled up a screen full of banking records. Rebecca's phone logs show a pattern. Every time a major vendor tried to reach you directly, the call was intercepted. Your contact information was systematically removed from corporate directories. I watched him scroll through months of intercepted communications. Catering companies asking about menu changes. Florists requesting approval for expensive arrangements. Wedding planners seeking confirmation on guest accommodations. All redirected. All approved by someone who legally couldn't approve them. David, what does this mean for Michael's wedding? Technically, the resort can't honor the contract. But that's not your biggest problem. He turned the laptop screen toward me. Look at these other transactions. The screen showed a list of corporate expenses from the past 6 months. Board retreat at a Vail resort, $89,000. Executive bonuses, $340,000. Consultant fees, to a company I'd never heard of, $127,000. All approved with forged versions of my signature. Fraud. This calculated destroys families daily. Subscribe to learn the warning signs. How much total? Preliminary estimate? Just over $2 million in unauthorized expenditures. David closed the laptop with a sharp click. Margaret, they haven't just been sidelining you. They've been robbing you. The conference room felt smaller suddenly. 20 years of trusting the wrong person had cost me more than respect. It had cost me millions of dollars that should have been Michael's inheritance. What's our next move? We file an emergency motion to freeze all company accounts pending investigation. But first, we need to document everything. David pulled out a legal pad. I want you to write down every conversation, every meeting, every time someone told you not to worry about business details. How far back? Start with your husband's funeral. Go forward from there. As I began writing, memories surfaced that I dismissed as grief-induced confusion. Board meetings scheduled during my doctor's appointments. Important documents that got lost in the mail. Phone calls that never got returned. Guess how many signatures were forged? Drop your number below. Chapter 4 Cliffhanger. 3 hours later, my handwritten timeline filled 11 pages. As David reviewed my notes, his face went pale. Margaret, there's something else we need to check. If they've been forging your signature for this long, we need to verify what else they've signed in your name. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number I recognized, the corporate accounting firm that handled our annual audits. This is David Martinez representing Margaret Thompson. We need an emergency review of all signature authorizations from the past 24 months. Yes, I'll hold. The hold music played while my stomach churned. How many documents bore my forged name? How many decisions had been made in my absence? How much of my life had been stolen while I'd been told I was being protected? David's expression told me everything before he hung up the phone. Margaret, you need to sit down. The message was 4 words: payment authorization revoked. I sent it at 3:17 a.m., 2 weeks before my son's wedding, while David's legal papers sat on my kitchen table like loaded weapons. I couldn't sleep after our discovery. $2 million stolen. My signature forged on dozens of documents. My son convinced I was too weak to handle business decisions. At 3 a.m., I'd finally had enough. The corporate banking system still recognized my access codes, something James had forgotten to change in his rush to control everything else. One click transferred all Golden Peak Resort payments into a holding account that required dual authorization. My authorization. By sunrise, my phone was ringing. Mom? Michael's voice sounded panicked. There's some kind of problem with the wedding payment. The resort says there's a hold on the account. I measured my words carefully. What kind of hold? They're saying the person who approved the contract doesn't have authority to authorize payments. It makes no sense. James has been handling everything. It makes perfect sense, I thought. Out loud, I said, have you spoken to James? He's not answering his phone. Mom, the wedding is in 2 weeks. Amanda's parents are flying in from Chicago. Her dress arrived yesterday. We can't have a payment problem now. The desperation in his voice almost broke my resolve. Almost. Michael, who told you I couldn't handle business decisions anymore? What? Mom, this isn't about you. This is about a banking error. Who told you I was too emotional? Too overwhelmed? Too fragile for company business? Silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. James said, he said you needed space to heal. That business stress was making your grief worse. And you believed him? You never talked about the company anymore. You never came to events or meetings. I thought. You thought I'd given up. Yeah. I looked at the documents scattered across my kitchen table. 20 years of being protected right out of my own life. Michael, I need you to listen very carefully. The payment isn't frozen because of a banking error. It's frozen because the person who signed your wedding contract didn't have legal authority to do it. That's impossible. James runs the company. James manages the company. I own it. The silence that followed lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom? I'm here. What do you mean you own it? I mean every deed, every stock certificate, every major contract flows through my signature. James has been forging my name for months, maybe years. My voice stayed steady despite the tremor in my hands. Including your wedding contract. That can't be right. Rebecca Martinez has been documenting everything. David Martinez has the legal proof. And as of 3:17 this morning, no money moves without my explicit approval. Ever had to choose between peace and justice? What did you choose? Another long pause. Then, Mom, are you saying my wedding is cancelled? I'm saying your wedding was never legally confirmed. But I'm also saying that's about to change. Chapter 5 Cliffhanger. Michael, I want you to come over tonight. Bring Amanda if she's willing. There are things about this family you need to know, starting with why James Thompson has been so eager to keep us apart. 3 voicemails were waiting when I hung up. All from numbers I didn't recognize. The last one mentioned an emergency board meeting. They were panicking. Good. They called an emergency board meeting without inviting the majority shareholder. Technically impossible, but they tried anyway. I arrived at the downtown conference room 15 minutes after the scheduled start time. Through the glass doors, I could see 6 men in expensive suits huddled around a mahogany table, their voices sharp with panic. James Thompson sat at the head of the table, my seat, according to the corporate bylaws, gesturing wildly at a stack of papers. When I pushed open the door, the room went silent. Gentlemen. I took the empty chair closest to the door and pulled out a legal pad. Please continue. James recovered first, his politician's smile sliding into place. Margaret, this is just a routine meeting. Nothing that requires your attention. A routine meeting about my company's frozen accounts? The smile flickered. There seems to be some kind of banking error. We're working to resolve it quickly. The error is that you've been authorizing payments without legal authority for at least 6 months. I opened my legal pad and clicked my pen. Please continue discussing how you plan to resolve that. The man to James's left, someone I didn't recognize, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should reschedule when Mrs. Thompson has had time to review the situation. I've reviewed it. $2 million in unauthorized expenditures. Forged signatures on board resolutions. Emergency powers used months after they expired. I looked directly at James. The only thing I haven't reviewed is why you thought I wouldn't notice. Corporate theft happens in conference rooms like this. Subscribe to recognize the patterns. James's face flushed red. Margaret, you haven't been involved in day-to-day operations for years. These decisions needed to be made quickly, and you've always preferred I've always preferred being asked instead of being forged. The unknown board member cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, surely we can work out these misunderstandings without involving outside parties. Outside parties like auditors? Like attorneys? Like the FBI? I let that last word hang in the air for a moment. Or do you mean outside parties like my son, who's been told his mother is too incompetent to sign her own checks? James leaned forward, his voice dropping to what I'm sure he thought was a reasonable tone. No one said incompetent. We said grieving. We said overwhelmed. We were trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From my own company? From my own decisions? From my own son's wedding plans? The wedding will proceed as scheduled, James said quickly. This is just a temporary. The wedding will proceed when I approve the contract. With my signature. On my letterhead. After my attorney reviews every line item. I stood up and closed my legal pad. 6 men stared at me like I was a ghost who'd suddenly learned to speak. Gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned pending legal review of all board activities from the past 24 months. Ever walked into a room where you weren't supposed to exist? How did it feel? As I reached the door, James called out, Margaret, don't do anything rash. Think about what's best for the family. I turned back one last time. I am thinking about family. That's why I'm taking back control of mine. Chapter 6 Cliffhanger. That afternoon, David called with news that changed everything. Margaret, the audit firm found something. James has been using company funds for personal expenses, including a condo in Miami that's not listed on any corporate records. The theft was bigger than we'd imagined. And my son's wedding was just the beginning. Michael knocked on my door at 7 p.m. sharp, still wearing his work clothes and a confused expression. Amanda stood beside him, blonde and nervous, clutching a leather purse like a shield. Mom, we need to talk about what happened today. I led them to the living room where David's evidence packets covered my coffee table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Michael's eyes widened when he saw the corporate documents, bank records, and legal briefs. What is all this? Proof. I handed him the original stock certificates. Your father and I built Rocky Mountain Hospitality together. When he died, I inherited controlling interest. 67% of everything. Michael studied the certificates, turning them over like he was examining foreign currency. But James always said. James said a lot of things. I pulled out Rebecca's folder. Including that I was too emotional to handle business decisions. That grief had made me unreliable. That it was kinder to keep me away from complicated situations. Amanda spoke for the first time. Mrs. Thompson, Michael told me you'd stepped back from the company voluntarily. I stepped back from the spotlight. I never stepped back from ownership. I showed them the board meeting minutes where James discussed widow management strategies. Read line 47. Michael's face went white as he read aloud. Emotional instability following spouse loss creates operational risks. Recommend gradual communication reduction. They called you unstable? Amanda looked genuinely shocked. They called me a lot of things. But they forgot to call me powerless. I handed Michael the payment freeze order. This is why your wedding payment bounced. Because the person who approved it had no right to spend my money. Michael sank into my old recliner, the same chair where I'd read him bedtime stories 20 years ago. Mom, I don't understand. If you own the company, why didn't you just tell me? Because I trusted the wrong person to tell you for me. I showed them Rebecca's phone logs. Call after call from Michael to the corporate office. Each one answered by James. Each conversation ending with reassurances about my delicate condition and promises to handle everything. He told me you needed protection from stress, Michael whispered. Said business decisions were too much for you right now. Right now? Michael, your father died 20 years ago. How long did James think I needed to recover? When someone you trust becomes a stranger, how do you find your way back? Amanda reached for Michael's hand. This explains so much. Why you never talked about your mom's work. Why you thought she'd retired. I thought. Michael's voice broke slightly. I thought you didn't want to be involved in my life. The room went quiet except for the tick of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. 20 years of distance built on lies someone else told. Michael, I want to be involved. I've always wanted to be involved. But I also want to stop a thief from stealing your inheritance. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of his father. What do we do? We take back what's ours. Legally. Quietly. And completely. I handed him David's preliminary action plan. Your wedding is going to happen at Golden Peak Resort. But this time, it's going to be properly authorized by the person who actually owns it. Chapter 7 Cliffhanger. As Michael read through the legal strategy, Amanda asked the question that would change everything. Mrs. Thompson, if James has been stealing for years, and he thinks you're too weak to stop him, what happens when he realizes you're not weak at all? Outside, a car door slammed in my driveway. Through the window, I saw James Thompson walking toward my front door with a briefcase in his hand and fury on his face. We're about to find out. James didn't wait for me to answer the doorbell. His key still worked, something I'd forgotten to change after 20 years of trusting the wrong person. Margaret, we need to discuss this banking situation. His voice carried the same patronizing tone he'd used at board meetings. There's been some kind of confusion. Michael and Amanda sat frozen on my couch as James entered my living room like he owned it. His eyes swept over the documents on my coffee table, and I watched his confident mask crack slightly. These papers. Where did you get these? From my safe. You remember, the one in my bedroom, in my house, containing documents about my company. James forced a laugh that sounded hollow. Our company, Margaret. Your husband wanted us to run it together. My husband wanted you to help me run it. There's a difference. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I have guardianship papers here. David Martinez suggested we might need to discuss your mental state, given these erratic financial decisions. Guardianship papers. My blood went cold. Michael stood up slowly. What kind of guardianship papers? Your mother has been under tremendous stress. Freezing company accounts, making accusations, refusing to trust the people who've been protecting her interests. James spread the papers on my coffee table like he was dealing cards. Sometimes family members need legal protection from their own impulses. Amanda's sharp intake of breath filled the silence. James. My voice stayed steady despite the rage building in my chest. Those papers require a doctor's evaluation, a court hearing, and proof of mental incapacity. Which of those do you have? His pause lasted too long. We can arrange. You can arrange nothing. I picked up my phone and called David Martinez. David? James Thompson is in my living room with fraudulent guardianship papers. How quickly can you get here? Technology exposes liars faster than ever. Subscribe to stay ahead of deception. James's composure finally shattered. Margaret, you're making a mistake. The company needs stable leadership. The board needs to follow the law. Michael's voice cut through the room like a blade. And the law says my mother owns this company. I stared at my son, hearing strength in his voice I hadn't heard in years. James turned to Michael with desperate eyes. Son, your mother isn't thinking clearly. These accusations, these legal threats. This isn't the woman who raised you. You're right, Michael said quietly. The woman who raised me was stronger than this. It took me 20 years to remember. The doorbell rang. David Martinez stepped into my living room carrying a briefcase that looked far more official than James's. Mr. Thompson. Interesting to see you here. David's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Especially since my office just received a very interesting call from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. James went pale. FBI? Systematic signature forgery involving millions of dollars tends to get their attention. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. They're particularly interested in the Miami condo purchased with corporate funds and registered under your name. The Miami condo. Rebecca had been right, panicked people make stupid mistakes. Drop the most shocking thing you've ever caught someone doing. James, I said softly. I think it's time for you to leave my house. He gathered his fake guardianship papers with hands that shook slightly. At the door, he turned back with one last attempt at control. Margaret, this will destroy the company. Think about the employees. Think about Michael's future. I am thinking about Michael's future. That's why I'm stopping you from stealing it. Chapter 8 Cliffhanger. As James's car pulled out of my driveway, David opened his folder and showed us surveillance photos from the Miami condo. The FBI has been watching him for 6 months. Margaret, your payment freeze didn't just save your son's wedding, it gave them the final evidence they needed. Michael looked at the photos, then at me. Mom, what happens now? Now we plan a wedding. 2 weeks later, I stood at the entrance of Golden Peak Resort wearing the same navy blue dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral, but today, I wasn't mourning anything. The morning air was crisp with that thin mountain clarity that made everything look sharper. Pine trees framed the resort's glass facade like nature's own cathedral. Cars with license plates from 5 different states filled the parking lot. My son's wedding day. At my resort. With my blessing. The young woman at the reception desk looked up with professional smile. Good morning, welcome to Golden Peak. Are you here for the Thompson-Richardson wedding? I'm Margaret Thompson. Her smile faltered for just a moment before training kicked in. Oh. Mrs. Thompson. We've been expecting you. She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me with new respect. Your suite is ready, and Chef Martinez wanted to personally discuss the menu modifications you requested. Menu modifications I'd never requested. James's fingerprints were still everywhere, even in his absence. That won't be necessary. But I would like to speak with Robert Chin, your general manager. Of course. Let me call him right away. As she reached for the phone, I heard familiar laughter from the restaurant balcony. Michael and Amanda, probably having breakfast before the ceremony. They sounded happy. Relaxed. Good. They deserved happiness that wasn't built on lies. Robert Chin appeared within minutes, a tall man with graying temples and the kind of calm confidence that comes from running luxury hotels. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Mrs. Thompson, it's an honor to finally meet you in person. Finally. That word carried weight. Mr. Chin, I assume you've been briefed on recent corporate changes? Yes, ma'am. James Thompson's resignation, the financial audit, the FBI investigation. His voice dropped slightly. I want you to know that the staff had no knowledge of any irregularities. We followed all directions we believed came from proper authority. I'm not here to assign blame to people who were lied to. I looked around the lobby. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, mountain views that took your breath away. My husband had dreamed of this place. I'd helped him build it. I'm here to make sure my son's wedding is perfect. Ever made an entrance that changed everything? Tell us about it. Robert's relief was visible. The entire staff is committed to making this the best wedding Golden Peak has ever hosted. I'm sure they are. But first, I need to see the books. All of them. I want to understand exactly what James approved in my name. Of course. Would you prefer to review them in the executive office? The executive office. I hadn't been inside my own company's executive office in 15 years. Lead the way. As we walked down a hallway lined with photographs of resort properties I owned but had never visited, Robert asked, Mrs. Thompson, will you be making any immediate changes to resort operations? Just one, I said, pausing at a photo of the Miami resort James had been skimming from. From now on, all major decisions require my direct approval. No exceptions. Chapter 9 Cliffhanger. The executive office door opened to reveal a wall covered with architectural plans for new resort developments, properties worth another $20 million, all requiring board approval I'd never given. James hadn't just been stealing from existing properties. He'd been planning an expansion that would have bankrupted the company while making him rich. And the contracts were supposed to be signed tomorrow. I didn't interrupt the father of the bride's toast. I simply placed the ownership papers on the head table, next to the champagne flutes, where every investor in the room could see them. The wedding ceremony had been beautiful. Michael in his grandfather's cufflinks, Amanda radiant in her grandmother's pearls, mountain sunset painting the sky like a postcard. For 2 hours, I'd been just another proud mother watching her son marry his best friend. But now, at the reception, it was time for business. The head table buzzed with quiet confusion as Amanda's father continued his speech about family, love, and new beginnings. Board members I hadn't seen in years squinted at documents they recognized but couldn't quite believe. "These ownership certificates," whispered Dr. Harrison, the hotel chain's longest-serving board member. "Margaret, are these current and valid?" I said quietly. "Unlike the board resolutions James has been filing without my knowledge." Word spread through the reception like ripples in still water. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Wine glasses stopped halfway to lips. The string quartet played on, unaware that their audience was discovering a 20-year deception in real time. Amanda's mother approached my table with wide eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, people are saying you own this resort. Is that true? This resort and 46 others." She blinked twice. But James Thompson always spoke as if. James spoke as if many things. Most of them weren't true. Michael appeared at my shoulder, still wearing his tuxedo but with his bow tie loosened. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Introducing myself to your wedding guests." I handed him a copy of the property deeds. "Your wife's family should know who actually paid for their dinner. Public truth-telling takes courage most people don't have. Subscribe if you want that strength." The reception continued around us, but the energy had shifted. Investors huddled in corners, reviewing contracts on their phones. Amanda's relatives asked careful questions about resort operations they'd assumed were James's responsibility. Judge Patricia Reeves, a family friend who'd known my husband, approached with a knowing smile. "Margaret, I wondered when you'd step back into the light." "I never left it. I just let someone else cast shadows." "And James? Where is he tonight?" "Probably packing." I sipped my champagne, excellent vintage, from a cellar I'd been buying wine for since 1998. "The FBI arrested him this afternoon." The string quartet finished their song, and for a moment, the reception fell completely silent. Michael took my hand. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to be sure. And because I needed you to see the difference between someone who protects you and someone who controls you." Amanda joined us, her wedding dress rustling like silk. "Mrs. Thompson, will this affect the company?" "Michael's job?" "The company will be stronger without thieves running it. And Michael's job is secure, he's the heir, not the employee." "What's the boldest truth you've ever revealed in public?" Chapter 10 Cliffhanger. As the evening wound down, Robert Chen approached with a troubling discovery. "Mrs. Thompson, we found something else in James's office. Contracts for selling Golden Peak Resort to a development company, scheduled to close next week." He hadn't just been stealing money. He'd been planning to sell my husband's dream piece by piece, starting with the property where my son had just gotten married. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. His resignation letter was 2 lines long. 20 years of theft reduced to personal reasons and effective immediately. I found it slipped under my office door Tuesday morning, printed on resort letterhead, my letterhead, though he'd been using it like his own private stationery for years. The coward couldn't even face me after Sunday's reception disaster. Frank Morrison had built his reputation on my husband's foundation and my money. Now everyone knew. The investors who'd praised his vision at cocktail parties were demanding meetings. The staff who'd taken orders from him for decades were suddenly asking me direct questions about operations. "Mrs. Patterson?" My head of housekeeping knocked softly. Mr. Morrison cleaned out his office before dawn. Security footage shows him loading boxes into his car. Smart man. Running before I could change the locks. But Frank underestimated my record keeping. Every financial transaction, every unauthorized decision, every forged signature. I had copies. While he'd been playing resort mogul, I'd been building a paper trail that could bury him. Rebecca arrived with coffee and a thick folder. The forensic accountant called. Preliminary findings. My hand stayed steady as I opened the report. Numbers don't lie like people do. 23 unauthorized property purchases. 41 falsified board approvals. Investment diversions totaling $2.3 million. Money that should have funded resort improvements, staff bonuses, community programs. "He used your signature stamp on everything," Rebecca said quietly. "Even documents you never saw. The stamp my husband had made for convenience during his final illness. Frank knew where I kept it, knew I trusted him with small administrative tasks. He'd turned that trust into a license to steal." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Need to talk. Emergency. F." Frank Morrison, reduced to anonymous texts after 2 decades of using my conference room like his throne. I deleted it without responding. "Mrs. Patterson?" Rebecca hesitated. "There's something else." The board meeting he called for Thursday, he scheduled it at the downtown Marriott. He was planning to vote you out permanently. The audacity should have shocked me. Instead, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Frank had forgotten one crucial detail: you can't vote out someone who owns the company. "Cancel that meeting," I said. "Schedule a new one. Here. Friday at 10. Should I notify the board members?" "Just the legitimate ones. Frank Morrison is no longer authorized to speak for this company." I walked to my office window, looking out at the mountain vista my husband had chosen for our flagship resort. Guests were checking in below, families starting vacations they'd remember forever. They had no idea their weekend paradise had nearly been stolen from under them. My computer chimed with an email marked urgent. The subject line made me smile: Frank Morrison. Employment verification request. Someone was checking his background for a new position. The timing felt like cosmic justice. I opened a fresh document and began typing Frank's reference letter. Every word would be truthful. Every sentence would be accurate. And when his potential employers read about his creative approach to authorization protocols and independent decision-making style, they'd understand exactly what kind of manager they were considering. The resignation letter still sat on my desk, those 2 pathetic lines that were supposed to end his responsibility. But resignation doesn't erase theft. It doesn't undo fraud. It just means you're running before the consequences catch up. Frank Morrison was about to learn that some people run faster than others. My son asked if I could forgive him. I said yes, but first, he needed to understand how manipulation works. We sat in my kitchen Tuesday evening, the same room where I discovered his missing wedding invitation 3 weeks earlier. Everything looked the same: blue ceramic mugs, morning sunlight through lace curtains, his father's reading glasses still on the counter. But the conversation we were having would have been impossible before. "I should have questioned things," James said, turning his coffee mug in slow circles. Frank made everything sound so reasonable. "Your mother needs rest. Business stress isn't healthy at her age. We're protecting her from difficult decisions." "Manipulation works because it sounds caring," I said. "The best lies always contain some truth." James had brought papers, every email Frank had sent him over the past 2 years. Reading them now, the pattern was obvious. Frank had systematically isolated me by convincing my son I was fragile, incompetent, overwhelmed by grief. "Look at this one," James pointed to a message dated 6 months after his father's funeral. Your mother seems confused about basic business operations. Perhaps it's time to consider a reduced role for her well-being. I remembered that week. Frank had deliberately scheduled meetings without telling me, then reported to James that I was missing important discussions. When I'd asked about the meetings, Frank claimed they were minor operational details, not worth my attention. He created the confusion he complained about, I said. And I believed him. James's voice was quiet. I thought I was being a good son by letting you rest. The hardest part wasn't forgiving James, it was watching him forgive himself. He'd been 28 when his father died, overwhelmed by grief and suddenly thrust into business discussions he barely understood. Frank had positioned himself as the experienced guide, the stable presence during family chaos. There's something else, James said. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to old text messages. Frank would send me updates about you. Your mother seemed tired today. She asked the same question twice in our meeting. I'm concerned about her memory. None of it had been true. Frank had been creating a fictional version of me, confused, declining, gradually incompetent. Meanwhile, I'd been at home, reading financial reports, maintaining detailed records, staying sharper than I'd ever needed to be. He was building a case, I said. Documentation that you were right to exclude me. The wedding invitation, James said suddenly. He convinced me you'd be uncomfortable with the stress of planning. Said smaller family events would be better for you. I watched my son's face as the pieces fell into place. Frank hadn't just stolen money, he'd stolen years of family connection, moments we could never recover. How do I fix this? James asked. You don't fix it, I said. You learn from it. You recognize the signs when someone tries to isolate family members. You trust your own judgment instead of letting others interpret people for you. My phone rang. Unknown number again, probably Frank, still trying to control the situation through anonymous contact. This time, I answered. Margaret, we need to talk. No, Frank. We really don't. I hung up and turned off the phone. Some conversations aren't worth having. How did you stay so calm through all this? James asked. I smiled, thinking of his father. Your dad always said anger is useful, but strategy lasts longer. Frank gave me 3 weeks between the wedding invitation incident and today. I used every minute. The phone rang again, my landline this time. James reached for it, but I caught his hand. Let it ring. We have more important things to discuss. Like rebuilding trust. Like teaching him to recognize manipulation. Like making sure this never happened to another family. The investigation revealed 8 other families, all with the difficult widows who'd mysteriously lost control of their businesses. Detective Sarah Chin spread the files across my dining room table like a grim puzzle. Each folder contained a story similar to mine. Successful businesswoman becomes widow, trusted partner assumes control, family gradually convinced the woman is declining. Pattern recognition, Detective Chin explained. Frank Morrison wasn't working alone. This is organized elder fraud with a sophisticated support network. The files made my stomach turn. Helen Garrett in Phoenix, slowly pushed out of her restaurant chain after her husband's heart attack. Patricia Wells in Miami, her construction company quietly transferred to her nephew while she recovered from grief. Susan Chong in Denver, her medical practice sold without her knowledge during her mental health leave. All of us over 60. All recent widows. All described by our own families as no longer capable of business decisions. The common thread is Dr. Marcus Webb, Detective Chin said, pointing to a business card paperclip to each file. Geriatric psychiatrist. He provided competency evaluations for all 8 families. I'd never heard of Dr. Webb, but Frank had mentioned him. Excellent specialist, Frank had said. Really understands the challenges older women face after loss. The evaluation forms were identical, detailed assessments concluding that grief had impaired our judgment, that business stress was harmful to our health, that family members should assume financial responsibilities for our protection. Dr. Webb never examined any of these women, Detective Chen said. The evaluations are completely fabricated. How is that possible? Family members requested the assessments based on concerning behaviors reported by business partners. Dr. Webb would file reports recommending reduced responsibility without ever meeting the patients. The cruelty was breathtaking. They'd created an entire medical justification for stealing our life's work. Where's Dr. Webb now? Gone. Office closed last week. No forwarding address. I studied the faces in the family photos scattered across each file. Sons, daughters, nephews, people who should have protected these women instead of participating in their erasure. What happens to the other families? That depends. Some of the businesses are already sold. Some of the women have died. Patricia Wells passed last year, still believing her family was helping her. Patricia Wells had built her construction company from nothing, working alongside her husband for 30 years. Her obituary described her as a devoted wife and mother, with no mention of her professional achievements. Even in death, they'd reduced her to supporting roles. The families who are still fighting. Do they know about each other? Detective Chen smiled. Not yet. But they will. Your case broke this open, Margaret. Without your documentation and evidence, we never would have seen the pattern. My phone rang. James, checking in like he'd started doing every day since the wedding. Mom, there's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Helen Garrett from Phoenix. Something about a restaurant business? I looked at Detective Chen, who nodded. Send her in, sweetheart. Helen Garrett walked into my kitchen like she was carrying the weight of the world. She looked exactly like I'd felt 3 weeks ago, angry, confused, determined not to be defeated. I saw the news about your case, she said. My family thinks I'm losing my mind. But I know what I built, and I know what they're trying to take. I poured her coffee in my best china cup. Helen, I said, let me tell you what I learned about fighting back. The courtroom was half empty when they read the verdict. I preferred it that way. Justice doesn't need applause. Judge Morrison, no relation to Frank, thankfully, read each count with the patience of someone who'd seen too many family betrayals. Fraud. Forgery. Elder abuse. Criminal conspiracy. The words echoed off courtroom walls that had heard similar stories countless times. Frank sat at the defendant's table in a suit I probably bought him for some company dinner years ago. His attorney kept shuffling papers like shuffling would change the evidence. 27 exhibits. 43 recorded conversations. 2 years of forged signatures. You can't shuffle away that kind of documentation. On the count of criminal fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Frank's shoulders sagged. His wife, I'd sent her anniversary flowers for 15 years, wouldn't meet my eyes. The financial restitution would take months to calculate. Properties to be returned, accounts to be restored, investment profits to be traced and recovered. My attorney estimated $3.2 million in total recovery, plus penalties. But the money wasn't why I was there. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to make a victim impact statement? I stood slowly, looking at Frank for the first time since his resignation letter. He was smaller than I remembered. Ordinary. The kind of man who steals opportunities instead of creating them. Your Honor, Frank Morrison didn't just steal money. He stole years of my relationship with my son. He stole my voice in the business my husband and I built together. He stole my right to be seen as competent in my own family. My voice stayed steady, though my hands were shaking. But he couldn't steal my records. He couldn't steal my memory. And he couldn't steal my determination to protect other families from experiencing what mine did. Judge Morrison nodded. Mr. Morrison, you're sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years supervised probation. You're ordered to pay full restitution plus damages. You're permanently barred from serving as a financial advisor or business manager. 18 months. It seemed light for 20 years of systematic theft. But Frank's reputation was finished. His professional licenses were revoked. His name would be flagged in every background check for the rest of his life. After court, James and I walked to the parking garage in comfortable silence. 3 weeks ago, we'd barely been speaking. Now he was driving me home, planning to stay for dinner, asking about my plans for the business. The Phoenix woman, Helen, how's her case going? Good. Her attorney is using our documentation as a template. Detective Chen connected her with 2 other families in similar situations. You're building something bigger than just getting your business back. I looked out the car window at downtown Boulder, thinking about the other women whose stories were still being written. Your father always said the best revenge is making sure the problem can't happen to someone else. Dad was smart. Yes, he was. And he'd be proud of how you handled yourself in that courtroom. James pulled into my driveway. Mom? I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. You saw it when it mattered, I said. That's what counts. The letter from another widow in Texas was waiting on my kitchen counter when we walked inside. My son's first board meeting as my appointed successor lasted 4 minutes. He'd learned the difference between authority and authenticity. 6 months after Frank's sentencing, the Golden Peak Resort chain was running better than it had in years. James brought fresh ideas without discarding proven methods. Staff morale was higher. Guest satisfaction scores were climbing. Financial performance was exceeding projections. Most importantly, decisions were being made by people who actually owned the company. The Texas case settled yesterday, James told me, hanging up his phone after talking with Helen Garrett's attorney. Full restitution plus damages. They're using our model, documentation, forensic accounting, criminal charges. Helen had become the second victory in what Detective Chen now called the Widow Network cases. 7 more families were fighting similar battles across 4 states. Each case built on evidence and strategies developed from the previous one. The FBI wants to interview you again, James continued. They think this pattern extends beyond what we've discovered. I wasn't surprised. Frank's methods were too polished, too systematic to be self-taught. Someone had developed this approach and shared it with other predators targeting vulnerable families. Schedule it for next week. But this time, they come here. My kitchen had become headquarters for fighting elder fraud. Dining room table covered with case files. Phone calls with attorneys, investigators, other families. Survivor network meetings over coffee and determination. James spread architectural plans across the breakfast bar. The community center addition is approved. Construction starts in spring. The Margaret Patterson Center for Family Business Education would be built adjacent to our flagship resort. Classes on estate planning, family communication, recognizing financial manipulation. Free consultations for families facing similar situations. Your father would love this, I said, studying the blueprints. He always believed business should serve community. He'd love seeing you run board meetings again too. You're terrifying when you're focused. Good. Fear keeps people honest. My phone rang, another widow from another state, referred by Helen Garrett. These calls came weekly now. Women who'd built businesses, raised families, survived loss, only to discover their own children had been turned against them by trusted advisors. Mrs. Patterson? My name is Carol Kim from Seattle. I think someone is stealing my restaurant chain. I settled into my chair with a notepad. Carol, tell me everything. Start with when you first noticed something was wrong. As she talked, I took notes in the same careful handwriting I'd used to document Frank's fraud. Each story was different, but the patterns were identical. The isolation. The false medical concerns. The gradual transfer of authority. The family members who suddenly stopped trusting their own mother's judgment. Carol, you're not losing your mind, and you're not alone. Let me tell you what worked for us. After the call, James found me in the kitchen, still writing notes. Another one? Another one we can help. The resort still bears my husband's name on the lobby plaque. But now, finally, everyone knows who really kept his dream alive. The staff know. The guests know. The board knows. My son knows. Most importantly, I know. The business cards on my desk read, Margaret Patterson, CEO. Not widow. Not former owner. Not consultant. CEO. 47 properties. 1,200 employees. Thousands of families who vacation at resorts built on principles my husband and I established together. Frank Morrison tried to write me out of my own story. He forgot that I've always been better with words than he was.